aware that the municipality or the government should be reimbursed for their attorney's fees? Some of you might think not, but it's a legitimate concern. There are abuses in public records requests. People sometimes will come in, and I'm sure no one here would do this, but sometimes people come in and they want to see every document that relates to A, B, C, and D. And they don't have a real purpose for doing it, but they're just mad at the town over something, or mad at a board member or an employee. And I recognize, well, that's perhaps the downside, and you have to take the good with the bad. But you'd oftentimes have to deal with these types of requests that are, frankly, overly burdensome. And what are some of the controls that exist right now on them? Well, right now, under the law, the first 20 minutes of search time is free under the state law. And I would venture to say that most times when you request a public record, or when the public requests a public record, it is given to them promptly, efficiently, and without charge. Now, where do the charges come in? Well, when there's a much more involved amount of research that needs to be done, and there was a much more involved time in redacting the documents to take out personal or medical related information, and having to stand up the copier and make the copies. That's where there's a cost factor to the municipality. But I don't think that happens in most of the cases. We hear the outlier type cases that Bob mentioned, the state police. It's interesting. I had heard that it was originally $2 million, and then they realized they made a mistake and they reduced it down to $1 million, not $12 million. But whatever it is, it was a tremendous amount of money. And frankly, I'm more interested in trying to find out, how did they justify that cost estimate? Because the way the process works is, if you get a cost estimate and you think it's unreasonable, and that certainly rises to the level of being questionable, you can ask more information on it. You can appeal to the supervisor of public records, who can review it and reduce it down. Now, I'm not aware that the supervisor of public records reduced it down to a negligible amount, so I don't know what the cost was, how much time was actually needed for that. But there is a process for that, and that's the exceptional case, I would suggest to you. And interestingly, and I hadn't remembered that the requester in that case apparently is an expert witness who makes his or her living testifying in court cases or adjudicatory proceedings. And this information was something that was helpful to that person in developing their testimony, for which they no doubt charge someone for. So it almost borders on a commercial-related request. Kevin pointed out that people can request all the names and addresses of the water customers in a community. Why should someone who is requesting this public information and is going to use it to make money off of be able to tie up local government in an inordinate way without the government being able to say, well, wait a minute, this is going to cost us X amount of hours and money, staff time. There is a reasonable fee. It's the price of the hourly rate of the employee, lowest paid employee qualified to do it. So that's another factor that I think you have to keep in mind. We keep hearing about the lobbying efforts by people to get the bill and so forth. The lobbying efforts that I'm familiar with are to try to improve the bill. There's going to be a bill. We want to make it workable. And something as important as public records, it should be workable. It shouldn't just create another series of laws that lack clarity, that are just going to result in another decade or two of litigation over what does it mean. So what are the concerns of local government? The staff time that I referred to, the abusive requests, the litigation-related requests, the commercial requests, the privacy issues. One of the panelists read from someone a very compelling statement who testified in Congress about the problems she had with the federal agencies. There are, I think, more problems on the federal and state level than on the local level, but let's not overburden and cripple local government to have to hire people, to have to divert limited resources from other tasks in order to comply with these public records requests. Right now, the proposal of the legislature is the first 4 hours are free. So, and I'll put this in the context, and I'll finish up in a second, of genealogical research, which is a fascinating subject matter, and you folks who are involved in that do great work. But you could come in, I could go under the new law, if it gets enacted, the first 4 hours free, I could go into a town hall and say, I want to see all the records since 1920 on the Lamke family. I can go to Chelsea, where my father was born in 1910, and say, I want all the records from the Lamke family that the city of Chelsea has going forward, because I'm doing a study on that. Under the law, the first 4 hours of that it has to be complied with, and it has to be free. And so I get that, tie up someone for 4 hours, and then the next day my neighbor comes in and says, well, I want all the records for the Smith family. It's not gonna work unless people sit down and try to make it work with something that is feasible and something that works. And finally, on the attorney's fees and costs, people who serve on town boards, it's not always a paid employee, but people who serve on town boards are, for the most part, volunteers. Most board members don't get paid. Those that do get paid, it's a small amount of money. Certainly they don't do it for the money. They do it to serve the community. And if there's going to be situations where the community is going to get hit with attorney's fees, or under some proposals, actual penalties, financial penalties, because someone made a good faith error in judgment on not releasing a document or not doing it quick enough, who's going to want to participate in local government? It's a disincentive to have fines. A couple of years ago, Bob and other people worked, and myself worked on the open meeting law and came up with a new statute that's in effect. And the new statute provides that there's a good faith defense, that if it wasn't an intentional violation, you're protected. If you relied on the advice of an attorney, your attorney, government attorney, in doing something, you're protected. That's not part of the equation here. And so we're certain that there'll be some new law enacted, but we hope that it will be a measured, fair, and balanced law, and we still remain willing to discuss it with the legislative authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sharon, can I respond to a few of those?
Sure.
Just I follow up on a couple of those points.
Bob and I follow each other.
Wait a minute. So you're continuing the debate.
Well, Jim makes a lot of good points.
Can I quote you on that?
Well, I mean, there are, but there are several mistruths in there as well. And yes, it was 2.7 million, not 12.7 million. What's 10 million among friends? The state police request was 2.7 million. You're right on that. But a couple of things I want to address. First of all, we keep hearing from the municipal side this claim that the public records bill, that this by modernizing and liberalizing the public records as this bill would do, that it's going to increase the number of abusive records requests. Now he says that certain of our examples are outliers, such as the state police one, these abusive record requests are outliers. This is not the norm under the public records law. I don't deny that this happens sometimes, but again, to quote Todd Wallach, who they'd rather not do, but Todd Wallach went out and reported on this issue. He went and talked. They said he doesn't talk to the clerks at cities and towns. Todd Wallach went and interviewed clerks at cities and towns in other states where they have liberalized their public records law, and he reported that what they told him was this did not result in any great increase in the number of public records requests that we're getting. This did not result in abusive public records requests. There's no evidence at all to support this notion that by creating a stronger public records law, as we've been talking about doing, that there's going to be an upshot in abusive requests. That's just not the case, and there's no reason to believe that. And then that raises the problem of how do you craft a law that allows local officials to sort of be making decisions about which ones they should respect, which public records requests they should grant and which they should deny. His example of one family comes in and wants to get all of their records, then another family comes in and wants to get all of their records. Well, do we want to give some local official the authority to say, well, I'm going to give this family all their records, if not this record? You either have to say that records are open or they're not. And if they're going to be open, they have to be open to anybody who requests them for whatever reason. You can't set reasons for it. You can't set restrictions on it. That's just the way it has to be. There's no way to draw that line otherwise. And I haven't heard any proposals for how you would draw that line. There has actually been some talk in the legislature about perhaps putting some language in the bill that would say if you have X number of requests beyond a reasonable amount in a given year, that maybe the clerk can have more time to respond to it or something like that. I mean, I represent newspapers that are frequent public requesters, and I'm sure a lot of you people are frequent public requesters. So you don't want a number limit on it. So I don't know how you do that. Just one other thing, I wanted to address the attorney's fees issue again, because again, nobody is talking about imposing attorney's fees on some innocent volunteer public citizen who's working in local government and makes a good faith error. That's not what this is about. That's a complete misstatement of what this is about. By the time any case ever gets to the point where we're talking about attorney's fees, this means that there has been a request that's been denied, that's been ignored. It's probably gone through the Secretary of State's office in most cases, or even if the citizens go right to court. This has been litigated through court. People don't go to court lightly. It's usually a very serious violation. By the time it gets, and even if they go to court, as you know, most court cases settle long before it ever gets to the point of a judge making a decision. If any case involving public records gets to the point of a judge making a decision and getting to the point where a judge can decide whether to impose attorney's fees, this is not some minor little mistake of a case. This is a case where there's been an outrageous or really a strong violation of the law before it's even going to be talked about. Nobody wants to punish innocent public officials who make some clerical mistake. So I think that's just a misstatement of what this is about.
It's not what the law says.
It's not what the law says, it's the reality
The
of it.
proposal law doesn't say that.
One thing I just want to interject, because I think you guys could be jousting for quite a while, is that even on a local level for genealogists who don't go and ask for everybody, over the last 100 years as a rule, but what we find with local offices is they really don't know the law. So sometimes we run into situations where we try to, keep it non-adversarial, but in fact that really the education issue is very hard. Did you want to add something to that?
I would, this is,
Hello? Oh.
is that on? No.
Yeah, but it's it was.
Is it?
It was just what it is. Oh, yeah. That'll do it.
1, 2, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you, sorry about that.
Yes, I have a degree in library science, and I studied at Simmons, and not too long ago, actually, thinking about a career change. And I took archives classes and electronic records, and I thought, what else could I do with this? Because I also have a background in municipal planning, and I thought, I'll be a city clerk. This is cool. They're the keeper of records. So I started to do research, and I got onto the website, and I looked, and lo and behold, there is absolutely, that I could see, no requirements for city clerks in this Commonwealth. There's no educational requirement. There's no requirement that they know anything about records, electronic records, any kind of records. There's no requirements at all. Some are appointed, some are elected. I think really that's a place to start. And because of my municipal background, I was at a GIS presentation years ago, and one of the cities said, this is great. We can get all this information on the assessing records and we'll sell them. And I said, wait a minute, whose records are they? Records about my house. Anything you can see from the street, sure, 2-story, you know, whatever you could drive away, but what kind of heating oil? Whether or not I have an alarm system? Why is that public? Why should that be out of, well, it's in the assessing records. I said, absolutely, but you have to go to get that information. So part of this conundrum, I think, is because of all of the electronic availability, if you will. And another time, I had an archives internship, private archive, and they said, genies, don't pay them any attention, we're private, we don't have to deal with them, because they will just take all your time. They said, but researchers, you know, if they're official and they have a real reason why they're in this archive, spend all the time you want. So it's kind of interesting. We think time isn't free. Resources aren't free. We need to think about that. And I'm sure there's some meeting point between 4 hours of free time. That could be, I was at a city clerk's office once, and someone came in, a school kid, and he wanted the city clerk to find out how many people were born on days with full moons. I'm not kidding. And the city clerk took it seriously. I'm like, I would have called that teacher up and said, what the heck is wrong with you? You know. I mean, it's just, so there's all kinds of stories. We get all kinds of stories. But I think we need training for city clerks, and probably not elections, probably an appointment system so that you get someone who knows what they're doing. I mean, they're all well-meaning, but I asked recently for a dual business certificate application from a city clerk or a town clerk. I was told no. I said, it's an application. I'm not interested in anybody's business. Well, I got it off of the website in Cambridge, you know. So there's all kinds of room for improvement, but I think, you know, hopefully we can get a bill that'll meet most people's needs.
Thank you.
I'd still like to be a city one time. I know there is, but yeah.
Thank you for what you said. I think that's true. I'm a genealogist, and I love to use public records, but I've seen abuse or things that are beyond it. And when you mentioned, oh, it's easy if it's electronic. It used to be you had to go down to City Hall and get it. It's not because it's electronic, it's because it's easy. So even easier than doing electronic search is to go to the clerk and say, I want you to send it to me in electronic form. The forms might not be in electronic form. So 4 hours, if someone did that, if you had 5 or 6 requests, and it wouldn't be Mr. Limke today and Mr. Smith tomorrow, it'd be Mr. Limke today and Mr. Limke coming back tomorrow and saying, my mother's maiden name is Smith, can you look up all this? It could well be. So that's the scary thing, and then you wouldn't be doing your real job. I don't know who saw the Globe article yesterday. I was all in sympathy because I was hit by a drunk driver once. I was all in sympathy with identify drunk drivers, whatever their job is, until it said they're going to demand that an employer give over the employee's dates of birth. I thought that was the gentleman who wrote Todd something, I hope he's not here, who wrote the article couldn't figure out what he wanted. So he was demanding their dates of birth of every public employee that he was in that agency. And that really scared me. I used to work at a university, and they would publish a nice directory, and they would have your employee, the names and the students, and they would have your work address, your phone number, your title. And then I left for another job, and when I came back to another job in that same entity, not the same job, I got a call from Bondwood Tellers about my overdue credit card that someone had set up using information they had gotten from the directory. So if someone could also get your date of birth, which on my Facebook page I have a fake date of birth, on my JP Licks birthday card Sunday thing I have a fake date of birth, that would be very scary to me. And as a genealogist, I thought, this reporter needs a genealogist, because if any of these people he's looking at are over 40, we know where their license numbers are. And if they're under 40, you know, you could ask when were they appointed and what's their middle initial, and you could very quickly tell, you know, Daniel, he used the name Daniel Sullivan, and I'm a Sullivan, so I can tell you it's a hard name. But if you have a Daniel P. Sullivan, who was appointed in 1999, so he was between 21 and 32 when he was appointed, and he works at Logan, so that means he's not the Daniel Sullivan who works at Amherst. You could figure this out. So I think reporters need genealogists, and I think a lot of the change has happened because of other laws added. So I've seen people request public records, you know, on a murder that happened in the Roosevelt administration, but someone there could still be alive. It was a very young person. And so everything was redacted, but if you went to the newspapers, there were no Corey laws in 1944. So you can get it all. So between HIPAA, Corey, privacy, you know, etc. I think that's part of what's impacting. I think that's hard on cities and towns. It's making it a lot harder to do. So I don't know if I have a question, but that's what I thought was worth sharing.
It's interesting that you talk about dates of birth, because any voting list in any community has your date of birth on it. And the street lists do too. And there are police chiefs who lecture at continuing ed, but not continuing ed, continuing care, who tell seniors, ask them to take your date of birth off simply so you won't be a target of home robbery, actually. You know, they target elder and scams. And I've asked a couple where I live, and I've been told absolutely not. We have to publish your date of birth on your street list. Now, why that is, I'm not sure. So, you know, it goes both ways.
I think supposedly that reason the date of birth is there is if somebody comes in, they don't. Sorry? If somebody comes in, they don't know, then they have to verify that this is the person that's there.
For voting, but not for a street list. The towns are just published.
They're published, yes.
Residence lists.
Does anyone want to speak to what's changed over the last few decades? And kind of going back to what Melinda was talking about, which was common knowledge when we were growing up.
I'd just like to comment that, you know, all this talk about redacting and protecting and quite honestly, for between 10 cents and 25 cents, I can buy your social security number online securely with no problem. It takes me under 2 minutes. I also know of several books that give you the full information about how to calculate everything, including the last 4 digits of your social security number, from scratch, based on knowing where you were born, basically. So what's changed is not that this information, which was first being distributed in the 1970s, is hard to get. It's not, but rather that it can be used for all kinds of nefarious, evil purposes. And yes, I agree that the public records laws cost money, but if the government finds it necessary to collect this information, they need to understand that it's also part of their duty to distribute it. And the redacting it's a exercise in futility, because that information, may be secure to some degree in your file cabinets, it may be secure to some degree in your computer hard drive, but in the end, the people who manipulate this information, the ones who report it, I mean, this is part of what was certainly the huge fraudster IRS scandal, was that people were taking the information from medical records, and those are easily acquired too. So that's what's changed.
Yeah, the one of the things that's happened is I think one of the attorneys representing municipalities talk about, well, it's a lot of work to redact things that are excluded. However, electronic records have many features, levels of security, and so on. So the issue, there's two sides to the sword with electronic records. One is, particularly in the last few years, the data breaches are huge. It's not just government employees. It's particularly medical records. And medical records are particularly vulnerable because the systems have not been secured even to the level that we would expect in the federal records that have been hacked. So we have an overall issue with security that the world hasn't solved. So that's something that's changed because we do have more electronic records, and because we're always chasing the criminal who's got a new idea. I think somebody told me that the biggest business in the world was counterfeiting, and the second biggest business in the world was trying to prevent counterfeiting, or something to that effect. So every age has issues, particularly with technology. But I think we're all in agreement that there are issues to be considered on all sides. Is there
something else that's changed? You sort of touched on this a little bit, but certainly the perception of the members that I represent, of the newspapers and the reporters that I talk to, is that since 9/11 there has been a drastic change in the mindset of public officials towards sharing information. Our law, the presumption of our law is that all records are open to the public unless they're covered by some exemption. The open meeting law, the presumption is all meetings are open to the public unless covered by some exception. The reality in the last 10 or more years has been shifting away from that government officials tend to look at public records requests as a nuisance, as a bother, as something that's not part of their job, even though their job is to serve the public. And that is a tangible change that a number of people have reported who've been working in this area for a long time.
I would tend to agree from two perspectives. One, as a genealogist, and the experience of many genealogists reporting. The Mass Gen Council works with the Records Access and Preservation Committee, which is an international committee of the National Genealogical Society, the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, and the Federation of Genealogical Societies. So we hear about records access issues, all over the country certainly, but also all over the world. So there is an issue that Leah Graff Goodman raised in her testimony. I'm not sure if it was part of the transcript or in subsequent questioning, but she called it specifically a fear culture since 9/11. And we have seen that as genealogists, and we have seen that in legislation, even on the federal. Mass Gen Council started to get involved with federal legislation after 9/11 because some of the measures were just completely had unintended consequences. They have, the legislation was passed, the regulations as they were initially proposed were draconian, they never got enacted, but the law still sits there, so it's still a threat in terms of the access to birth and death records. And in the Massachusetts legislature, it was not understood that these records are records that the state controls. The federal government has rights to statistics, but it's a state's rights issue. The federal government cannot dictate how each state addresses vital records access. So I did want to point that out. Yes? Do we have? Yes.
Hi,
Oh.
I'm Beryl. I work at a group called Muck Rock. If you are a municipal clerk or a lawyer, you may not like us very much. Part of what has changed with technology has been sort of the ability, right, of people who are all interested in common records to be working together to try to get these records. And so a lot of Todd's reporting has been able to build off of the information that we've been able to gather because we, if you're not familiar with us, we're a news organization, but we focus on public records requests and FOIA requests, and we help people at all levels of government file these requests. And we also have the ability to submit lots of the same requests all at once, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are in a sort of very unique position where not only are we the journalists who are using public records, but we also have to interface on a regular basis with the municipalities who are all dealing with a variety of these problems, and also the very frustrated citizens who are also trying to get these records to work. So in terms of what has changed, I think a bit of the argument that it's very burdensome for municipalities to handle these issues, while we're incredibly sympathetic to that, and we would love to talk more about how we can work with people on how to fix this, I know that I personally go through and I read, based on our system, hundreds of public records requests. And that doesn't mean that, I obviously don't go out and do the research that the clerks are going to have to do, but there is a lot of possibility and potential in technology in making this system actually work in an effective way if we can get a lot of people talking about it. So I guess I would just like to make the point that one, I would love to talk to anybody who has any opinions on how Muck Rock can maybe make your lives slightly less difficult, because I know that there are some agencies who, we send follow-ups every 2 weeks, just following up on requests that we haven't heard from. And there are some agencies that even find basic follow-ups harassment. And so, I've submitted requests all across the country, and I have a lot of, our system allows a lot of experience in this. And I mean, if you guys are probably familiar with, the Olympics, a lot of the public records, almost all of those public records requests were handled through our site. Those requests that had fees put on them, they were able to raise those fees because we were able to crowdfund those fees. And I just don't think that the idea that that it's burdensome is going to be enough to not fix the law at this point, because it's really hard to get, even 30 people in a room talking about public records. So I guess that's my 2 cents. I can talk at length about public records. I would love to with anybody who's interested in doing that. Yeah, my name is Beryl Lipton, and I work at a place called Muck Rock.
Thank you.
Hi, I've seen some of your requests, and you do very important work, and one thing I think is the lawyers get in the way. So a lot of public agencies are not ever allowed to talk to the person who's doing the request. And when someone says, I need all the Smiths in Chelsea, if someone could say, is there a particular year, a particular street, somehow to narrow or help to identify, that would be really useful. But they're not allowed to, because all public records requests will go through the clerk, the attorney, the whatever, and many requests that come, if people are a little more educated and narrowed and did a little research first, how do you keep these? Are they filed under the husband's name or the wife's name? Are they filed by address? Are they separated by year? Are they separated by one family house versus 3 family house? That kind of thing. And so I do think there's, what people think is safe, keeping lawyers in between, makes it probably harder for both parties. But being specific, and actually a lot of journalists are that way too. I can't tell you how many journalists don't do their homework. And, I'm looking for this record. It might have been Boston, it might have been Revere. It might have been 1972, it might have been 1975. And I've got 25 others like them. Read your own newspaper, look it up, tell me the right. Don't make me your research assistant, basically, because then they could be better off at doing what it is for looking for records. But it is important to share what's available. A lot of the time, the hard thing is the finding it. I mean, to get it narrow enough so you could find it.
Yeah, and I'm totally sympathetic to all of the burdens, all of its requests. I've absolutely seen, absolutely the people who are asking for all of the emails who mention the words "Happy Birthday." That's really going to. And I've seen that request. That's really going to take a lot of work, and we're really not trying to encourage people to be undertaking that work. But I guess from where we stand as an organization, what I'm interested in is sort of these, a lot of times people are a little afraid of the government, so they don't want to just call the town clerk and say, how do you keep these? Like, I would like to ask for this. And as soon as you actually get somebody on the phone, it turns out everybody's a nice human, and it's not as much of an issue as people think it is. So I totally hear that, and I think in Massachusetts, because we're based in Massachusetts, we would be more than happy. Any sort of input about how the way we handle our stuff and how we can communicate better with agencies would be absolutely appreciated, because we're trying to facilitate this process.
Sounds like there's support for education on both sides of the issue.
Well, one other point I just wanted that she had raised was this whole issue of technology, and I think there's a lot of some of the concerns that are being raised by the municipalities could be addressed through technology. The redaction, for example, there are very low-cost applications you can get, plugins to Microsoft Word and programs that will go through and automatically redact Social Security numbers, for example. This does not have to be a time-consuming process. This is not expensive technology. It doesn't have to be a burdensome thing. So some of the concerns that are being raised can be addressed through technology if the records are already in electronic format.
Thank you. Just 1 minute. I wanted to. Okay.
Yeah, on court cases and attorney's fees, which relates to 2 things that have come up. The last 2 cases that have reached the Supreme Judicial Court, the municipalities have basically prevailed. One of them was brought by the Monsanto-related companies against the city of New Bedford for a whole host of attorney-client work product privileges. So it's not true that it's the outliers that get through the court system. And in those cases, the municipality didn't recover any fees against this Fortune 500 company. The second one was special education records, all special education placement records, which the lower court said you could just redact the child's name and address from those records. The Supreme Judicial Court said no. You had to read the whole record. You had to redact the school. You had to redact any information that could indirectly identify the student receiving the placement for privacy concerns. Now, it may be true that there are other sources of this information, but the municipality will get sued if it releases those records with the wrong identifying information from the parents that don't want that information released.
What was the goal of the records request? What was the purpose?
Custodians don't get to ask what the purpose is. They simply, I think it was probably for funding reasons, how many special education outplacements you have, since that's a driver of school costs.
So it wouldn't just be a statistical...
No, they wanted to see the records, so they wanted every record of every special education placement in the school district.
But who would want this, is what she's asking.
Well, we don't know, because you can't ask why they want it.
It might be the parent of a child who's under an IEP and who is having an issue with the school district who doesn't want to provide the services.
Well, it may be, but they aren't entitled